Meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 79 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates, also known as the Mighty Ogo. Pursuant to Standing Order 108-3C and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, September 28, 2023, the committee is meeting for briefing by the Parliamentary Budget Officer and to consider committee business. We'll go on camera probably the last 15-20 minutes for the committee business, mostly the budgets. Just a reminder, everyone, not to put the earpieces next to the microphone as it causes feedback and potential injury. Mr. Giroux, this is meeting number 79. I think this is probably your 75th appearance. Welcome back. It's wonderful, as always, to have you here. We'll turn things over to you for your opening statement.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. My notes will be quite brief because I think you'll have many questions for me.
Reports, notably on a universal drug plan, on the potential return to investment on electric vehicle car battery plants, as well as our recent economic and fiscal outlook in the last couple of weeks. So I assume that you and your colleagues will have questions on these reports, but I'm happy to take questions on these or any other topics.
Wonderful, sir. Thank you very much. We'll start with Ms. Cusi for 6 minutes, please.
And thank you very much, Monsieur Giroux, for being here with us today. It's very much appreciated. As I asked in the House yesterday, back in March, the finance minister said that the budgetary deficit was going to be $40 billion. And in your recent report, you indicated that she was off by more than $6 billion. So why would this be that she was off by such an incredibly large amount?
We based our estimate on information that is known at this time, but there is one big unknown that the minister probably has that information and we don't, and that is the final deficit for the year that ended on March 31st. So we still don't have the public accounts. So based on that incomplete information, we do indeed estimate that the deficit for the current fiscal year will be $46.5 billion, and that's due to slower revenue growth and also higher expenditures. And that's why we think the deficit will be some $6 billion higher than what the minister indicated earlier this year.
Thank you very much for that response. Now, why I see that between the current fiscal year 2022, 2023, and 2028, 2029, expenditures increase significantly. I believe it's an average of $4 billion every year. Why is that, please?
It's due in good part to new programs that have been announced and included in our fiscal projections. So there's a number of programs. I don't have the precise specific list, but we included all the information that was available as of September 15th, including information that was provided to us by the Department of Finance. So it's mostly due to new programs because existing programs, they tend to cost slightly less than what the government indicated. So it's mostly new spending and new programs being introduced.
That's right. In your report, you say this upward revision is due to new measures. So I was going to ask for you to expand upon those new measures. They're outlined in the report as being those announced in Budget 2023 and through to September 15th. Is there any specifics you would like to mention within those new measures or those new expenditures relative to the deficit increase, please?
Well, the dental program is certainly a significant piece of these new expenditures, and also to a large extent the subsidies for electric vehicle battery plants, even though this will be progressively coming into force as production ramps up at the two plants. So these are two things that come to mind.
Yeah, and I believe my colleague Mr. Lawrence will get further into more of the finance aspects of it. But would you say that reduced expenditures would make us less dependent on nominal GDP growth in terms of the future?
Well, reducing the overall rhythm, pace, or absolute level of expenditures would certainly have one advantage. It would reduce the debt servicing cost, which is another item of expenditure that is rising relatively fast, due in good part to the rising level of debt, but also the increasing interest rates. So slowing down the pace of revenue, assuming that this would translate into a lower deficit, would contribute to reducing the reliance of the government on debt financing and reducing debt servicing costs.
So you're saying if the government spent less, then we wouldn't have to rely so much on nominal GDP, and therefore taxation coming into revenues.
Well, reducing expenditures could allow the government to reduce some taxes. That's if that's your question, then the answer is yes. That could lead to that.
Thank you. I'm now going to move on to the overview of government's digital service transformation. Your comment in the report there, or your summary, is that while the government has made improvements, there is still inconsistency in the ease of access and use of services. There is also no centralized information on the total amounts that have been spent or saved on these initiatives, as the latter is generally not tracked. Why do you think this is the case? Why do you think that in a time where we're seeing a $46 billion deficit, $6 billion greater than anticipated even back in March, we're seeing a government that isn't even making the effort to track or use data for savings within the government?
That's a good question. Why the government is not, or departments are not tracking that information? For example, the progress they are making towards digitizing the client or citizen services and the potential savings that are derived from this increased digitization is, in my opinion, a missed opportunity to track what is potentially a good story when the government is digitizing services from end to end, because it can lead to substantial savings. For example, processing a tax return electronically costs significantly less than processing that manually, or processing an application, whatever the system is or the process is. Doing that end to end electronically costs significantly less than doing that in person or through call centers. But the government doesn't seem to be tracking these savings, certainly not to a significant extent.
In the AG report this morning, a third party has estimated that to modernize the systems will take between $2.7 and $3.4 billion. Would you agree with this estimate, yes or no?
I don't know. I haven't looked at the cost of updating.
I'm afraid we'll have to take that I don't know as an answer for now.
Thank you,
Mr.
Chair.
Zouari, for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And once again, Mr. Giroux, welcome to our committee. I want to go once again on the record, as I always do, to thank you for making yourself available to this committee, always on a short notice, and also being a great partner in our office. Every time that I've called your office, you and your team's been very accommodating and very helpful. So once again, thank you. I want to actually go on the same topic that Madam Kusi went, and talking about the digital service transformation. You touched on some of the benefit that this will bring to the government, but you also, in your report, you talked about some of the unique challenges that Canada is facing. And I know we've benchmarked ourselves against OECD and some other countries, but can you talk about some of those challenges? But because you're quite clear in your report as areas that we could improve, opportunities that we have around tracking, around integration. But I would appreciate if you could spend a little bit of time on those challenges as well for us. Thank you.
Sure. And in discussing with experts in the lead up to that report, it became obvious to us that there are several challenges. Providing services from coast to coast to coast, and even internationally, when we talk about passport services and immigration services, is a challenge. So various locations in different time zones. But these are not insurmountable challenges, but these are challenges. The other very important aspect is security. That is very important to everybody who works in the IT space. And it's especially true for the government because people put their trust in government when it comes to safeguarding their personal information. So it's even more important for governments to ensure the security of IT systems and citizen-facing systems. And another aspect is the provision of services in both languages, which some countries don't have to face. So it's not an insurmountable challenge, but it adds to the complexity, as well as the legacy systems, which are another challenge for government services. And finally, what came out loud and clear in talking to government sources is the staff shortages and the labor shortages in the IT system.
Thank you. You specifically in your report, you hit on a couple of initiatives. CRA was one, IRCC was another one, and you rightly touched on the fact that especially when we are trying to process application or file internationally, security plays a huge role, as these are core system around our immigration and around our processing. My question to you is the fact that these processes and these initiatives may be starting at different times, can that result into data being available as far as integration is concerned at different stages? So it might be considered as a reason for why we are not at the stage that we should be as it relates to the integrations of these systems.
It could be one reason, although not being an IT specialist myself, it's difficult for me to say that it is definitely one reason, but I think based on what we've seen, it's a plausible explanation. And also the fact that the government may want to move in increments as opposed to do one big transformative approach could also be one reason why there is progress, but not as fast as some would like.
Thank you for highlighting that increment, as you highlighted in your report. When it comes to passport digitization and online processing, the number target is around 600,000, whereas the goal or the overall need is around, I think, 4.5 to 5 million passport. In your opinion, when you did this study, what might be the driver of that phase approach?
Probably two things. Funding, because resources are scarce. But we were told by senior government officials that even if there was funding to be provided, unlimited funding, for example, it would be very difficult to find the qualified individuals who would be capable of establishing end-to-end digital services for citizens. So money, but more importantly, staff, qualified staff.
Okay. So we, from a strategy point of view, and I only got about 30 seconds and probably is not going to leave you much to respond, but what you have said from a strategy position, we are ranking well. When it comes to the execution, we are not ranking as well, ranking as high as when we look at the strategy. Could the fact that we in Canada are dealing with the challenges of staffing, especially in that technical area, a driver of that?
I'm afraid there's no time for an answer, but perhaps...
I got 30 seconds.
No, you've got
Just
2 seconds.
Thank you.
This is Vignola for 6.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur Giroux, merci.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Giroux, thank you for being here once again and for coming on such short notice. Mr. Giroux, we've already talked about the increase in the number of public servants, but despite hiring many new public servants, there have been issues. We've talked about passports when it comes to Service Canada. I have colleagues who received notes from people coming from other ridings. There are people who have similar addresses, and the mails getting mixed up. So that is something that you have to experience to truly understand it. Is it worrisome to see that expenses are going up because of hirings and then seeing the results? How is it possible to improve service?
Reste particulièrement.
That's an issue that I'm particularly interested in. I've noticed a marked increase in the number of public servants since 2016, and a proportional increase in spending that that corresponds with the increase in public servants, but we haven't seen similar improvements when it comes to service. Performance indicators don't correspond to this increase. We've seen some of the indicators at the Department of Indigenous Affairs, for example. So it's possible that even departments setting their own targets are unable to reach them. In 2022, we saw issues with passports, with border services, and with wait times in other sectors. So yes, it is worrisome. Thank you, Mr. Giroux. At the moment, there are all sorts of programs. We've discussed them, and yesterday, the IRAE published a study, and this was only concerning Quebec, that there are $7.6 billion in services offered both by the Quebec government and Ottawa. Is this figure acceptable? Should this doubling up occur? And is your team able to study the repercussions of these same services being offered by different governments? It's something that is almost inevitable in a federation with several levels of government that must share certain responsibilities. Some responsibilities are clearly under one jurisdiction or the other, but there are shared responsibilities like justice, for example, and there are other sectors where there has been a transfer of responsibilities. So I think it is normal for there to be a certain degree of doubling up, but I haven't seen those figures, so I can't comment on those specifically, but I know based on experience that there is some work that is done both by Quebec and the federal government in areas such as taxation, for example. That can represent hundreds of thousands of dollars. So it's possible that the administrative cost of that could be assessed if our committee decided to study that with certain specific parameters that would have to be determined, of course. Thank you. Before my motion, I would like to come back to your recent report on economic and financial perspectives. You say that the increase of the ratio of debt to GDP, 42.6% in 23-24, and that figure will go down to 37.8%, which is far beyond the 31.2% ratio that we had before the pandemic. So when do you think that we will come back to a ratio similar to before the pandemic? We haven't provided that estimate because usually we look at a 5-year outlook, and we won't be reaching that same ratio in the next 5 years. I would say that that's especially worrying because there's a lot of infrastructure that is in its at the end of its useful life, and that will have to be renovated or rebuilt. Is that included in your estimates? It will probably affect our estimate depending on the timeline during which governments make those investments in infrastructure. What happens with infrastructure, though, when it comes to accounting, is that if the government purchases infrastructure, it doesn't have any net impact on the deficit. It's the amortization of the infrastructure that will have an effect. Mr. Jones.
Being here, the important work that you're doing. Last time you were here, we talked about the carbon tax, and you stated that 8 in 10 Canadian families will come out ahead on the carbon tax. And also, the Governor of the Bank of Canada cited that the carbon tax would have an inflation impact of about 0.15%. So that's 15 cents on $100, spent. Can you tell me, would that equate to the same on a $100 bag of groceries? Would it be 15 cents?
It would depend on the exact composition of that bag of groceries, but on average, that should be about the same thing.
So, I calculated, the corporate profits from big grocery stores, and that looks like about $3.90 on a $100 bag of groceries. Have you looked at and done analysis on the corporate profits side of things?
We have not on groceries.
Okay. You also identified that when you hit $170 a ton, it's going to be about 0.5%, the carbon tax, the impact on inflation. It's not nominal, it's not nothing, but it is related. But have you looked also like at the corporate profits of oil and gas, just like I stated around groceries? And we've seen huge profits in oil and gas. The carbon tax went from 11 cents to 14.3 cents. But we've seen, where I live, it's $1.78 at the pump for a liter of gas. And very little of that is the carbon tax. Most of it is corporate profit. Can you speak about, have you done any studies on the impact of that?
What we are in the process of doing is look at a motion that one of your colleagues, Mr. Morris, asked us to cost a tax on profits for oil and gas, the oil and gas sector. And we were planning on releasing that soon or a few days ago, but we encountered unexpected delays, so we plan on releasing that, the cost or the revenue-raising measure of such a tax.
Have you looked at what the impact would be on the Canadian economy if we didn't have the carbon tax, and the impact of a border carbon adjustment that would be applied on Canada should we do nothing? And secondly is also, if we did nothing, the 8 and 10 that currently get a rebate, what would they shoulder if we just put it on everybody and shared that?
So we haven't done a scenario where nothing is done. What we have done is looking at the impact of climate change. But in that world, we have assumed that in that hypothetical scenario, we have assumed that everybody does what they're supposed to do. So we have two scenarios. People have made commitments, and they fully meet these commitments. And another scenario where it's only policies that are implemented as of now. And we find that there is a significant economic impact between now and 2100, so over the next 75, 77 years.
You did a report way back, I think 2014, cited that you projected it would be about $900 million a year, the impact of climate emergencies, and that it would eventually be between $43 and $50 billion a year. And my understanding is we're well over $5 billion in the last year, wildfires and flooding. Have you looked at what the impact is on inflation from climate-related emergencies? And I can share with you, in my riding, the highway was cut off from a fire, and the impact on inflation where I live was much more than 0.15% from the carbon tax. But have you looked at, or are you considering doing a study of climate-related emergencies, the impact it has on the Canadian economy, and certainly how much it impacts inflation?
We haven't looked at the impact on inflation of climate-related emergencies, but there is a lot of interest from parliamentarians in our work on carbon and climate. So it's something that we are constantly reassessing what should be the next topic in that area.
So you can imagine this won't be a surprise question as a New Democrat that helped be part of the team that negotiated, a pharmacare plan in a confidence supply agreement with the Liberals. Back in 2017, you conducted a cost analysis for a single-payer universal pharmacare program for Canada. The report found that we can extend comprehensive prescription medicine to cover every single Canadian while also saving billions in overall drug costs. Last week, you published a report updating that analysis of a single-payer universal pharmacare and once again found that it will save Canadians billions of dollars over the next 5 years, starting with $1.4 billion of savings in the next fiscal year alone. Can you explain why you found that comprehensive single-payer universal pharmacare will expand access to the millions of Canadians who currently lack adequate coverage while also reducing overall drug costs?
So we have assumed that if you have a single payer in Canada for drugs, prescription drugs, there will be bigger and more powerful negotiating power on the part of that single payer, and that they'll be able to negotiate a lower cost for drugs, and that some confidential rebates that are currently being provided to some public plans, provincial public plans, would be also included in that single-payer drug plan. So it's a result of lower overall drugs as a result of that bargaining power, which will be in part eaten up by more access to drugs, notably by those who don't have a drug plan right now, or who have to pay out of pocket a significant portion. So an increased use of drugs.
Thanks. I'm afraid that's our 6 minutes. We'll go to our next round. Mr. Lawrence, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Giroux, and always enjoy the conversations we have. Just to pick up on what Mr. Johns was talking about, what would be the total cost to the taxpayers of a single-payer pharmacare program?
So we estimate the total cost to be $33 billion in the first full year of implementation, rising to 38.9. That's the gross cost in 27-28.
In your economic and fiscal outlook, you haven't included that cost, correct?
No, because that was not known as of September 15.
Do you think that would have a material impact on your numbers?
It would have a material impact, but it would depend on the exact split between the federal and provincial governments. The numbers I quoted to you were gross numbers. If we subtract amounts already spent by provinces and by the federal government, the net cost comes down to about $13 billion. So it depends how that additional expenditure is split between federal and provincial governments, but it would have a material impact on deficit figures going forward.
And you're also, of course, aware that Canada's not living up to our NATO obligation of spending 2% of our GDP. If we were to do that, would that have a material impact?
Well, if we were to reach the 2% target, that would mean additional costs of $10 to $12 billion per year. I don't remember off the top of my head, but we released a short report last year on that very topic.
And then you've probably also read the former head of Stats Canada, Philip Cross, has said that we have the worst per capita GDP since the Great Depression. And the OECD predicts us to have the least and the worst capital investment of any OECD country, one of the lowest productivity and one of the lowest economic growth. So it's clearly there's a storm brewing here, right? And so these numbers are not great. And I don't feel great, and I don't think the people in Northumberland, Peterborough South, feel great about a debt to GDP ratio approaching 50%, with having a deficit now predicted at $46 billion. But this could get much worse, couldn't it, Mr. Giroux?
Well, if the government follows through on a pharmacare plan, for example, increasing defense expenditures, and that is not associated with additional tax revenues, the deficit will go higher, and the debt to GDP ratio could stop falling or could even start rising. So it's quite possible.
When would you, Mr. Giroux, you've been very candid before, and I really appreciate your candor. When, as a parliamentary budget officer, would you start getting concerned or nervous for the financial stability of the country? Is it 50% of the GDP, debt to GDP ratio, $100 billion deficit? What would be?
It's not necessarily an absolute number because we see countries such as Japan, which is above 200% or was above 200% of GDP, but doing still relatively well in the financial markets. I think it has to be looked at in isolation, in conjunction with other countries. And so there's no one number where we hit a wall, so to speak. It's in the perspective of a longer term, whether we are on a path of ever increasing debt to GDP ratio, that is what is really worrying, would be worrying.
Then we've also heard from many economists that perhaps we heard from Tiff Macklin that we were going to be low for long, and now we're actually hearing it's going to be high for long. The other risk factor is that we could have continued high interest rates, which could cause our debt service charges to increase. Is that something we should be currently concerned about as well?
It's always something to be concerned about when you have an accumulated stock of debt that has to be refinanced. It's always risky to assume that when interest rates are low, they'll stay low forever. Hoping for the best and planning for the best is not very prudent. That's why it's always advisable to factor in some level of prudence when you are making long-term projections.
We've seen some evidence that might be occurring as we look at the bond markets, right? And we've seen the bond prices appreciate considerably over recent days. And so, is that something that your office follows? Is that something that should give Canadians concern?
It depends. It depends what happens in the fall update that the government will be tabling imminently or in the fall, and what happens in the budget. So if the direction is decreasing deficits, it won't be that worrying. But if we see deficits increasing and the debt to GDP ratio not decreasing or even going upwards, that is something that could be worrying depending on the longer term trend.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Lawrence. Ms. Satwin, please.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And thank you very much, Mr. Giroux, for joining us. Last time we saw each other was at the Indigenous Northern Affairs Committee, so I'm happily on the OGO committee now. I'd like to focus in on the overview of the government's digital service transformation. I'm particularly interested in environmental impacts and also just accessibility and how it can improve us as far as service delivery in our own riding offices as well. And in your report, it mentioned, that there was inconsistencies, even though that there have been improvements made, but also perhaps a lack of transparency. So I'm wondering how could we improve transparency to determine whether funding for the digital transformation initiatives is sufficient to address the priorities identified in Canada's digital government strategy roadmap?
So the comments related to transparency related to the fact that the government often announces investments in digital services or IT transformation and announces the numbers overall. So that many millions or hundreds of millions to improve digital services and upgrade IT system. And it's very difficult for us and for anybody, in fact, to determine the part that is allocated to maintaining or upgrading the back office systems, for example, the hardware that makes everything happen, versus the amounts that are spent on improving or digitizing services. So that's what we meant by transparency. Departments don't seem to track these numbers distinctly. They see that as one big bundle.
Thank you. I also noted that there were, important aims to improve client services in CRA and ESDC, and there was a comment about the linking to the My Account piece and not being able to access some of that information. So I'm wondering, have you followed up with the CRA about their information and why it could not be publicly disclosed?
We have followed up with them, and it was an inadvertent mistake that they identified the information as confidential when, in fact, it was not confidential. We asked them before releasing the report, are you sure this is confidential? But there was a misunderstanding somewhere in the chain of command at the CRA, and they mislabeled the information as confidential.
So then maybe without even disclosing some of that specific information, could you describe any conclusions that your office could draw from the My Account tool?
Yeah, we found that, the My Account tool at CRA is quite efficient at providing a whole suite of services, and CRA has made significant investments over time to ensure that the My Account is providing more and more services, from just the statement of account to providing the capacity to look at your notice of assessment, to then providing information that you need, for example, as a result of an audit or an information request. So gradually, the CRA has been able to expand its services delivered through My Account, which we found was an interesting development. And having used these services myself, I found quite convenient.
It also got me thinking just about, digital service transformation as a whole and kind of how this encompasses some Canadians who don't have access. I'm thinking about perhaps, remote Indigenous communities, seniors or disability community. So should we focus only on those cost savings, even though we might not be able to include everyone? Just kind of interested in your opinion on that.
I think digital services can help make services more accessible for those in remote communities, for example, or those with mobility impairments. So being able to access these services in the comfort of your home, to use a well-known formula, it can be very handy and useful for people who don't have the means to get to government offices. But it can also serve as an impediment if you don't have access to a bandwidth or a computer. So there are pros and cons, but that, I think, boils down to the fact or suggests that even though digital services is probably what most Canadians expect, there has to always be another alternative for clients to access the services if they can't or won't access the services digitally.
I guess just more broadly, what considerations should the government keep in mind when looking at spending reviews?
That's a very interesting one. It depends. I think the government has to keep in mind what its objectives are, ultimate objectives, and have a clear set of criteria as to what services or programs it wants to maintain, which ones it's ready to let go of, whether it wants to do spending reviews to reduce some programs or services, or whether it wants to target only internal services. Then that leads to different paths for service reviews or program reviews.
Thank you very much. Right on 5 minutes. Ms. Vinola for 2.5 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You, in your document on digital services, you say that your analysis does not take into consideration the fact that the government will have to deploy additional resources to manage the new tax. With this 1% of the population that public servants represent at the federal level, do you think the government has enough resources internally to manage this new tax? And if not, I know it's hard to answer off the top of your head, but how many public servants would need to be added approximately? Answer: it depends how the tax is presented, how the law is drafted. The difficulty here is that the design will greatly influence the application of the law, but given the number of platforms that the tax will apply to isn't very high, it probably isn't necessary to have hundreds of public servants to administer the tax. All we need are the right legislative tools. But I don't believe it's a tax that will require a lot of resources, given that the number of entities that the tax will apply to is limited and easily identifiable. Thank you. In your report on economic perspectives, the calculations about the deficit and what's coming over the next few years, does that include the request from the TBS to find $15 billion in cuts? And if so, to have a real effect, would we have to cut more? And if so, what amount would actually have a positive effect on these deficits?
Won't have time to answer that this round. You'll either in writing or perhaps the next round. Mr. Johns for 2.5, please.
So your report on full-time equivalents in the public service shows that the number of FTEs is projected to decline from 428,000 to 400,000 in 2025-26. So that's 4.7% higher than pre-pandemic levels. But according to StatsCan, Canada's population is projected to grow from 5.7 to 9.3% in that same period. So the public service could grow as little as half of as much as the population grows. Would you expect to see a decline in the availability or quality of services that Canadians receive if the population continues growing faster than the public service?
That's an interesting question, too. So it depends where these additional public servants have been placed and where any additional increases would happen. So what we've seen is the government has announced additional public servants in areas where they provide direct services to the population, but we've also seen an increase in public servants on back-end applications, so internal services, for example, so public servants that are not directly responsible for direct services. So it depends where these additional public servants were or would be in the future to have an impact on the services.
So looking at the size of the federal public service compared to the size of Canada's population, it's pretty revealing. I think in 2006-2007 fiscal year, the public service size was 1.06% of our population size. Following pre-pandemic declines, our public service has reached 2006 levels again. In 2022-23, it's 1.07% of our population. But we're projected to decline again. In 2026, we're expected the public service to dip below 1%. Have you analyzed what gaps in the public service would result from this decline? And I'm also, I think, we saw the Conservatives cut, like, say, a third of Veterans Affairs, which led to a backlog, which is costing more money for the people, Canadians not getting access to benefits, cuts to DFO. What does it look like for cuts?
So we have not looked at the impact of potential reductions in the size of the public service. For example, where would that be and what it would look like and what the impact would be on services. It's something that we will consider doing once we are able to get more information. Once the plans for the $15 billion in reallocations or reductions have materialized, and it's something that we are considering doing in 2024.
Thank you very much. Mr. Genuis for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very pleased that we have the Parliamentary Budget Officer with us at committee today. Sir, could you start by telling us what is Canada's current national debt?
So the number, I had it handy and I've lost the page, but it's roughly speaking, it's about $1.5 trillion. So slightly lower than that, $1.2 trillion based on our most recent economic and fiscal outlook.
Okay, so Canada has a debt of a federal national debt of $1.2 trillion. What was Canada's total national debt in the year 2015 when Prime Minister Justin Trudeau took power?
I don't have that number off the top of my head. I don't have historical numbers. Sorry.
Okay, do you recall approximately?
Approximately, that would be around $500 to $600 billion, if my memory serves me well.
Okay, so $500 to $600 billion was the national debt in 2015 when Justin Trudeau took office. It is $1.2 trillion now, and you're using an approximate figure historically. But are you fairly confident that the national debt has more than doubled in the 8 years that Justin Trudeau has been Prime Minister?
If not more than, close to. So, given I'm going on memory here, I wouldn't want to be too definitive.
So if not exactly, then approximately. The debt servicing costs projected for this fiscal year, what are the total debt servicing costs, the costs associated with having that debt?
We estimate that these will be $46.4 billion in the current fiscal year.
And according to the numbers that I have, that is a significant increase in debt servicing costs over last year. That's because, if I understand correctly, because of an increase in interest rates.
Yes. Last year, we estimate these numbers to have been $34.8 billion, and we'll have final numbers when the government tables the public accounts.
Since the current prime minister is responsible for about half of the national debt, it follows that the debt accumulated during that period, that the total debt servicing costs we're paying, half of those are as a result of debt accumulated in the last 8 years. Is that correct?
Not exactly. We need to look at the historical debt and what's the composition of that debt, because debt that was incurred, for example, in the 1990s would be at a higher interest rate, and there would be still some of that debt that we are carrying on our books. So half is a rough approximation, but that may overstate it slightly.
Okay. All right. So as that old debt has to be renewed, we renew it at the current interest rates, which may be lower than they were in the 90s, but still, let's say, substantially higher than they were 2 or 3 years ago, as a result of the various factors that have led to an increase in the cost of borrowing for government as well as for Canadians. So, in terms of that debt servicing cost, $46.4 billion. Could you give Canadians a sense of what else could have been purchased for that amount of money? What, in terms of healthcare transfers or other needs that Canadians have? What is that value equivalent to?
Well, I can give you a couple of numbers to put these things in perspective. Elderly benefits this year will be $76 billion. So that's providing old age security and guaranteed income supplement to all seniors. Employment insurance this year will be $23 billion. So employment insurance, parental, regular EI, maternity, etc., will be $23 billion.
Okay, so that's an interesting thought experiment. Just to interrupt you there. So if this prime minister is responsible for debt that led to about half of the debt servicing costs, then we're paying, you say it could be a little less than that. So let's say we're paying $20 to $23 billion in debt servicing costs associated with this prime minister's debt. That's the equivalent to doubling employment insurance, doubling the value of maternity leave for everyone. We could be doing that, let's say, instead of paying debt servicing costs.
That's one interpretation. I wouldn't want to be the one stating that because I need to do a bit more analysis.
You're very precise, sir, and I appreciate that. Overall, your estimate is $46.4 billion in debt servicing costs. Roughly half, maybe slightly less, solely the responsibility of this prime minister who's doubled our national debt in the last 8 years. I think it's clear that he is not worth the cost, and I thank you for your hard work and analysis.
And I'm not going to be able to give you time for a response, but perhaps at another time, such as Mr. Baines, who's up for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to Mr. Giroux for joining us again. The president of the Treasury Board of Canada recently published this month guidance on the use of contracted professional services, including management, consulting. And the president stated that these new set of guidelines will help managers determine when to contract for professional services versus when to use internal services resources. So the guide also lays out practical considerations for managers when structuring contracts so that they deliver best possible value, can be effectively managed, and fully align with requirements of the directive on the management of procurement. Could you please tell us about your thoughts on this new set of guidance?
Well, it's difficult for me to assess and to speak about these guidances because that was part of the spending reviews. My understanding is that it was part of the spending reviews and the announcement that there would be a reduction in contracts. So service contracts. So I forget the exact terminology. So difficult for me to comment on that specifically. Sorry.
Okay, I'll go into something else. You asked parliamentarians and legislators to consider examining existing legislation to identify and address other potential barriers to service digitalization, data protection, security, and exchange. Do you have pieces of legislation in mind?
It's mostly the FAA, the Financial Accountability Act, which restricts the type of agreements that federal institutions can enter into with their counterparts when it comes to providing digital services. So it was a commitment by the government, I think, in the 2021 budget, that there would be amendments to the FAA, as we call it. Instead, the government went through regulations. So that's the kind of things that we had in mind, like amendments so that federal institutions can more easily enter into agreements for service delivery with their provincial partners, for example, or other entities in other levels of government.
Okay, so and then what would be required for the government to implement a centralized process to track costs and savings resulting from its digitalization initiatives?
So I think a directive from the Treasury Board and this Treasury Board Secretariat, so that departments can better distinguish between the costs of maintaining their IT systems on the one hand, and the costs of improving digital services or introducing new services. So that's I think that would be the easiest way to track these two different types of spending streams. So essentially, a directive from the Treasury Board and the Treasury Board Secretariat would probably be sufficient.
Okay. And I ask about you estimated that in a written communication to committee, the cost for average full-time equivalent for public service was roughly $135,000 for 2023 to 2024. Have you costed the savings that would result from the projected decline in full-time equivalents from current fiscal year to 2025 to 2026? I'm not sure I heard that earlier. I'm not sure if it was asked.
No, we have not costed the savings resulting from the projected decrease in full-time equivalents. What we have found, however, is that even though there might be plans to decrease the number of FTEs, with successive budgets and fall updates and off-cycle announcements, they often entail additional FTEs. So even though there might be plans to, or there might be planned reductions in expenditures, they don't always materialize as the government announces new measures. So the short answer is no, we haven't costed that.
Okay, Mr. Chair, how much time? No.
30 seconds.
Okay, that's all the questions I have for today. Thank you for joining us again, Mr. Giroux.
Thanks, Mr. Baines. Ms. Cusi, please, for 5.
Thank you, Chair. I had mentioned the AG reports that came out earlier today, Monsieur Giroux, and one of the data points that came out was that they stated there was no historical data and that 12% of the necessary reporting was missing. Was this something that you encountered when you were completing your digital report?
We didn't look that far back in history, but we found that government departments were not keeping track of potential cost savings when moving from paper-based or other means of service to digital services, and that seemed to be widespread. We found, however, that IRCC, Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship, had an estimate, a rough estimate of moving to e-application, electronic applications for passports, and they found that there would be savings of between $1 and $5 per application. The savings seem low, but it's because it's only the application that will be digitized. For good reason, there will still be heavy manual interventions for the processing and issuance of passports, which is what one would expect from a country issuing passports. So not a lot of information tracking when it comes to e-services and digitization of services.
Yes, and further to that, another interesting point around the AG report today on modernization was that they've recognized for 24 years, it's been 24 years since the government recognized that there was a serious infrastructure equipment deficit, and that this has been a critical issue. And yet, to this date, after 8 years of this Liberal government, there is no centralized plan for modernization. Did you encounter that when you were conducting your report? And why do you think that is? Why do you think that there is currently no centralized plan?
We didn't look at that specifically, but what we found was a lack of the absence of distinction between maintenance of mainframes and other IT equipment versus investments in digitization. The reasons why is that, and I've been providing advice to ministers before I was parliamentary budget officer, and it is always very difficult to sell to a minister that they need to invest hundreds of millions or dozens of millions or even $1 million to maintain IT equipment, because it's not very sexy and doesn't lead to interesting announcements, and that's the main reason, I would say, to be very candid.
Yes, politicians definitely only like to talk about those things which are sensational. In your report, in addition, you gave the passport example, but on page 12 of your report, sort of continuing on the passport example that you gave, you said there is a considerable level of uncertainty on these potential cost savings and efficiencies, as they will be dependent on whether overall costs of the passport program return to pre-pandemic levels and if the efficiencies lead to processing more passports. So if you were to give some recommendations to IRCC, my apologies, I'm still, I come from global affairs when it was DFAID and DFAT-D, so in my mind it still rests there, but no, it's moved to IRCC. What advice would you give to IRCC to track, to look for these efficiencies and to measure these efficiencies?
I would say maybe they already do that, so maybe it'll be very easy for them to listen to me, but I would say tracking the cost of processing a passport application and tracking the costs of the new system, the e-application, and see what are the differences, if there are any, that could lead to cost savings for the government, and the time it takes to process both streams, which could lead to increased efficiency for citizens who require passports.
Moving to another element that you examined in your overview of the government's digital service transformation report, in it, the CRA stated that they could not publicly disclose the information that Employment and Social Development Canada freely provided. So what do you think the reasoning is for that? And were there any discrepancies between the analysis of the two departments that could lead to secrecy in sharing this information, or I'd rather say a lack of transparency?
So
I'm afraid you're not going to have time to answer that. Would you be able to provide it in writing to us? Mr. Kuzmirchuk, please, for 5.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Giroux, thank you so much for responding to our request to appear before the committee so quickly. We know we didn't give you a huge heads up, but I think all of us here just appreciate that you always answer the call and always answer the bell. So thank you so much, sir, for being here. If you don't mind, I want to ask you a question regarding the break-even analysis that you did for Stellantis and the VW battery plant. Hope that's okay. In Windsor, in my hometown, 8 years ago, under the Conservative government, my community had an 11.3% unemployment rate. And I imagine if you go up and down the 401, manufacturing communities like mine had unemployment rates north of 7, 8, 9, 10%. They were bleak years in our community. Businesses were closed. The impact on restaurants, businesses, shutter doors, people leaving the community because they had no jobs, they had no prospects. Interestingly enough, at the time, it was the leader of the opposition who was the Minister of Jobs at the time. Things were tough. And so as you can imagine, the investment that our federal government, that this Liberal federal government made in the Stellantis battery plant and in the Volkswagen plant, you can imagine this is the biggest, most important investment that we've seen in the history of our community, certainly over the last 100 years. Huge. And again, they are large sums, no doubt. It is a big investment. You mentioned, and we know that the Conservatives are against this investment, much like they were against investing in working class communities like mine back in 2015, so that's not a surprise. And I venture a guess that if they ever had the chance, they would pull the plug on that investment on both the VW plant and the Stellantis battery plant. I'm not going to ask you to comment on that, but what I wanted you to respond to is you mentioned in your report that the break even for that major investment, and it's $28 billion, is 20 years. And it's wonderful to hear that Canadians will get a return on their investment, that this will be a net zero cost to Canadians. And these are production subsidies as well, too. So these are performance subsidies. The company has to perform, has to build a certain amount of batteries, and has to keep a certain amount of jobs to get those subsidies as well, too. So those are not upfront subsidies. But the president of the Association of Parts Manufacturers took issue with your report and stated that that it is only based on the production of cell and module battery components, that it does not include the 20-year payback window. It doesn't include revenue generated from new vehicle assembly, from subcomponent manufacturing parts, from the mining of raw materials, the recycling, and the construction. So the entire supply chain that will be anchored in place because of these historic battery investments in Windsor and St. Thomas and Kingston and elsewhere. Can you respond to the president's questions or concerns with your analysis?
Certainly, I think that's a mischaracterization of our report. We did take into account the direct, indirect, and induced economic impacts of the battery plants in our report. What I think it's Mr. Volpe that you're referring to. What he thought we had, where he takes offense in our report, or where he has concerns with our report, is that the Trillium Network report, which is the basis on which the government decided to go with the 5-year return on investment, that report also assumed that there would be a whole ecosystem that would be built, including electric vehicle assembly plants. And we have yet to see a Volkswagen assembly plant. So we took out these other aspects because they have not materialized yet. And in the Trillium report, they say all these other things would require additional subsidies. So to take a more reasonable approach, we looked at the direct, indirect, and induced economic impacts of the battery plants themselves, taking into account that these would lead to spillover effects, as every major investment does. And speaking to the soundness of our approach, the government of Quebec and the government of Canada, I said, used the same methodology as we did for Volkswagen and Stellantis to assess the economic impact of the Northvolt investment that was announced a couple of weeks later.
And that is our time. Thank you. Thank you. We're now switching over to Ms. Vinola for 2.5, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to come back to your report on financial perspectives in Annex C. If I look at 2022 and 23, and then I look at 28 to 29, I can see that income tax in 28-29 represents 62% compared to 22-23. Corporate tax is only 101% compared to 22-23, and taxation on non-residents is 109% compared to 22-23. Despite the increase, which is pretty important when it comes to immigration, revenues don't follow. So does that mean that there's stagnation when it comes to the number of companies that exist or in their revenues? I'm trying to compare these figures. Thank you. That's an excellent question that we regularly look at. Taxation on non-residents refers to taxes imposed on companies that are not based in Canada or non-residents. For example, companies or trusts. So that figure is usually pretty stable because they might move. When it comes to corporate tax, there have been positive developments federally and in provinces where taxes have been higher than what our model suggested. So when it comes to predicting corporate tax, we don't expect there to be positive surprises forever, but that's why our predictions are relatively stable. When it comes to income tax, usually that figure follows the growth of GDP. It's relatively predictable given that the base is well spread out, because you're dealing with thousands of individuals compared to corporate tax. So that explains why corporate tax we expect to be relatively stable. It was quite high over the last few years. And conversely, taxation, income tax will increase. Thank you.
Government's digital service transformation points out that there is, quote, no centralized information on the total amounts that have been spent or saved on these initiatives, as the latter is generally not tracked, end quote. So we've seen from contracts like those for the ArriveCan, for example, and that app, and how difficult or even pretty much impossible it is to track and tally the government's spending on digital initiatives. We're glad we have Bill Curry from the Globe and Mail to do that work for us. But we can't even track the headhunters and the middle people that are making loads of money off of these things. So now we're seeing that the savings from the digital initiatives are generally not tracked at all. This is hugely concerning. If we aren't tracking how much is saved, how can we know if an initiative was worth it? And maybe, so when it comes to evaluating these projects, we're pretty much blind going in. Can you speak about what challenges or gaps arise when this information isn't available for analysis? And I'd also like to hear your thoughts on how this could be tracked and centralized and what the benefits would be. And maybe you could speak about the economic leakages too.
Thank you. So when we talk to government departments about tracking the savings, potential savings from digitizing some services, they very almost unanimously pointed out to the fact that it's not just in a perspective of saving money, it's to improve services. So they say it's one of the main reasons why they don't track potential savings, because that's not the perspective in which they provide these services. Although I would say that it's part of the equation. There are savings if you move people away from in-person services or call centers towards e-services. A good way of doing that would probably just for the government central agencies, Treasury Board Secretariat, to require departments to track how much they're spending to provide certain type of in-person or phone services versus e-services. Not very difficult to do, in my humble opinion, although it might be challenging for some organizations that don't track their current costs. But I think any sound organization or any sound deputy head would want to know how much it costs them.
Employees, the union would be probably a good start, and workers on the front line. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Johns. Mr. Lawrence for 5 minutes, then we'll go to Mr. Sousa.
Thanks very much. You mentioned it in your opening comments with respect to the lateness of the public accounts. I know this is an area of frustration for you. You've expressed it publicly before. Could you explain to Canadians why that is an issue and why it causes challenges not just for you but for transparency in general for the government?
that the fact that we don't have public accounts, and today is October 19, so we don't have public accounts yet, and the fiscal year of the government ended March 31st. So we are almost 7 months into the new fiscal year. You collectively have been asked to vote on appropriations, so to vote on allowing the government to get funding to function. You've been asked that in March. You've been asked that on a couple of occasions, but you still don't know what happened with the money you voted on 18 months ago. So it's a concern for me that collectively speaking, we don't know what was the outcome of the year that closed March 31st, but yet we're almost 7 months into the next fiscal year. The International Monetary Fund says that best practices would call for public accounts to be tabled within 6 months of the end of a fiscal year, and the Government of Canada, with all its machinery, could certainly do that if it wanted to. So there might be a lack of willingness on the part of the government to do that. I don't know why, because we have seen years where the AG signed off on the government's public accounts in September, but they were not tabled until weeks and weeks after that.
For that, and indeed, if they were a public company, there'd be some pretty severe consequences from their continued reporting of late, which says you're exactly right, Mr. Giroux, where we are asked to vote for something when we don't know what the results of the last version were. I just wanted to, Mr. Johns brought up the impact of the carbon tax, and I just want to read actually from the Governor of the Bank of Canada's letter to the Finance Committee, actually in response to my question. And he said, according to bank calculations, if the charge were to be removed from three main fuel components, that being gasoline, natural gas, and fuel oil, the inflation rate would decrease by 0.4. That's a 10% reduction in inflation, according to Tiff Macklin, the Governor of the Bank of Canada. If, in fact, if this is true, which I believe it is, and the government eliminated the carbon tax, and we had a 10% reduction in inflation overnight, would that help your numbers, and would that help the economy?
And a brief summary.
Yes.
I'll pass, but sorry.
Thanks. We'll go to Mr. Sousa, please.
Thank you for your presentation, for being here today, and listening to some of the questions that are coming before you. So I'm trying to get some clarity here. We talked about increasing debt. We know it's an issue. We all want to try to control it, recognizing the sensitivity around the demand and the requirements for some of the programs that are coming. What is Canada's current GDP?
It's about $2.8 trillion on a nominal basis.
What was it in 2015?
It would have been significantly lower than that on a nominal basis.
Has it doubled?
Probably.
There you go. So we've got a doubling of power in terms of economic vitality as a country, and that's been growing. So how does that compare with other countries in respect to our debt to GDP?
Compared to G7 countries, I think we have the lowest debt to GDP ratio.
Good. And we compare I know some of the opposition members are trying to compare what we've done in the last 8 years during the pandemic, which have been very challenging times. Under Stephen Harper, did the debt grow?
I'd have to go back into the historical
numbers. I have the numbers. They
but
almost doubled during that time. And so what is it, and even if we do these programs and these initiatives, is it debt that's the issue, or it's our ability to sustain debt and service it and grow our economy? What is more important to you?
That's a very good question. I think debt sustainability is a big concern.
What is our credit rating for Canada?
It varies by agency, but it's usually very solid.
And it's very good still?
Yes.
Notwithstanding some of the concerns that are being discussed, but we are all concerned. One of the issues that we're looking at under Treasury Board is a savings of about $15 billion going forward. Not an increase, but a savings and finding ways to become more efficient. How would that impact our debt to GDP, given what you've just, they've given you hypotheses as to increasing spending. What would happen if we would actually decrease some of that spending?
Well, it depends where the spending would be decreased, but it's one thing to look at savings, but what is more important at a macro level is what happens with the overall spending.
So it's important, though, for us to maintain some of those efficiencies to sustain our programs. Debt servicing is another issue that we monitor. And back in the 2000 and the 1995s and 2000, do you have a sense of what our debt servicing ratio was?
Probably upwards of 30%. 30%.
Much higher than it is, almost double what it is today, is it not?
Yes.
Yes. And when we revolve our bonds, and we have quite a few of them every year that comes up, what did we do in the last 5-6 years? What did we put those bonds at?
The interest rate has been anywhere between, I think, 1%. It depends on the maturity.
And we,
to 4.
And we locked those in for a long period of time, if I'm not mistaken, almost 30 years. Had we not done that, what would happen today?
And we'd have to refinance the debt at current short-term rates.
Right. So we took precautions. Now, one thing you mentioned in your proposal was the amount of prudence. That's essential. Is the Government of Canada fiscally, because we can't manage monetary policy, we manage the fiscal policy, do we have prudence built in?
I don't think so.
You don't think we have as much as we would like?
There's not...
Colleagues, I'm going to interrupt for a second. I understand we're all having a lot of fun, but please, let's allow a question and answer. And I hate to sound like the speaker, but please.
Prudence in the sense of a reserve or a caution, that's not been the government's practice. Are the forecasts reasonable or consistent with our own? Yes.
Right. So we have taken those precautions to ensure that we have our bases covered in regards to as we go forward. And when you look at our authorities from the other agencies, they don't have any, there is not a risk in the horizon over Canada's ability to sustain or be strongly rated?
No, there's no doubt on international markets about Canada's capacity to service its debt.
What is your assessment of the way the government's operating in light of those situations, in light of the demands that are putting upon us because of the monetary situation, general inflation in the world, supply chains, all the other circumstances that are affecting Canada? Are we taking the precautions? Are we reacting effectively?
That's a difficult question for me to answer because that would mean passing judgment on government policies and the overall direction of the government.
What's the inflation?
That is our time. I think we have enough people around the table who are willing to pass judgment one way or the other. We're almost at we're almost, we're short of time, colleagues. So the final round, we're going to go 3.5, 3.5, 1.5, 1.5. Please watch your clocks carefully so we can get in a full time. Thanks very much. Mr. Generous?
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I haven't had a chance to welcome Kathleen Wynne's former Minister of Finance to the House of Commons. I want to congratulate him on joining us. He shared with us his deep concern for fiscal responsibility. He just asked who balanced the books. Stephen Harper balanced the books. He's concerned about fiscal responsibility, he wants us to believe. And I can only say that if Kathleen Wynne's finance minister is the voice of fiscal responsibility in the Liberal caucus, then we have even bigger problems than I thought we did. We heard previously that Canada is going to spend this year $46.4 billion on debt servicing. So that's not new spending, that's not new debt, that is just money that taxpayers' money that we have to spend to maintain the debt that we already have. And that's in a context where the current Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, has more than doubled the national debt. To the Parliamentary Budget Officer, my understanding is that $46.4 billion figure, how does that compare to the total amount that the federal government transfers to the provinces for health care?
It's slightly lower than the transfers Canada Health Transfer, which this year is expected to be $49.4 billion.
So 46.4 to 49.4. So with about a $3 billion difference, we transfer a similar amount of money to the provinces for health care as this government spends on servicing the debt. So hypothetically, if we didn't have debt in this country, we could actually double the transfers we're sending to provinces. And if we didn't have the debt that was accumulated under this government, we could increase the amount of healthcare transfers to provinces by 40 or 50%. That's the real world impact of the out of control debt and out of control increases in costs associated with debt servicing that have come under this government. And we heard from this government in the past, don't worry, the cost of servicing debt is low because interest rates are low. But they failed to consider the fact that interest rates, of course, go up. Could you confirm, sir, that we've seen significant increases in the costs of debt servicing as a result of the increase in the interest rates?
Yes, that's an important factor.
And in comparison to last year, you said previously, there's been an over $10 billion increase in debt servicing costs in total as a result of the increase in the interest rate.
Interest rates, but also the increase in the debt stock.
So the government is increasing spending, increasing debt. That's driving inflation, which is increasing costs for consumers. That's leading to increases in the interest rates because of rate hikes that are responding to that. And that is further leading to an increase in the debt servicing costs. Is this a kind of snowballing effect that we're seeing as the government spending is driving increase in various indicators that are all impacting the costs that Canadians have to bear?
It's one factor that contributes to increasing interest rates and increasing inflation, but it's obviously not the only one.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Mr. Kuzmirchuk. You're splitting your time with Ms. Atwin for 3.5. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm really fascinated by the selective memory of my colleague here across the way. Can you remind the folks around the table what happened, Mr. Giroux, globally? Let's say it's starting March of 2020, that affected every country around the world. Was there an event that had an impact on spending?
I came back from March break. No, seriously, there was COVID.
It was COVID,
yes.
Yeah. And how much of, obviously the response to COVID required a strong, robust response to protect Canadians and businesses. How much of that spending was due to protecting Canadians during COVID?
Over time, we've estimated that over $300 billion was spent by the federal government to provide income support to individuals, to corporations, to procuring vaccines.
If the Conservatives had their way, if there was no wage subsidy program, would fewer or more businesses close without the wage subsidy program?
Point of order, Chair.
Yeah, one moment.
It's fair and it's clear.
Thank you.
Janice, briefly, please.
Would it be appropriate to point out at this time that Mr. Kuzmirchuk's completely inaccurate in his statement regarding our position on the wage subsidy?
Okay. Mr. Kuzmirchuk, you're at 1:12. Could we please just get through these final few minutes, colleagues, all of you, except for Mr. Johns is very admirably quiet today.
It's pretty funny.
Yeah. Mr. Kuzmirchuk, you're at 1:12, so you've got 2 minutes and 20 seconds.
Mr. Giroux, again, if the Conservatives had their way and they cut supports for businesses during COVID, would there be more or fewer businesses operating today?
Well, assuming that there wouldn't have been no business support for businesses, I think it's fair to say that there would have been quite a few more businesses going out of business in 2020 and 2021.
Thank you, Mr. Giroux. Had the federal government not responded robustly with PPE and the vaccine program and taken it upon ourselves to fund that program, without more vaccines and more PPE, would more or less Canadians die had the Conservatives had their way?
Well, I'm not a public health expert, but based on what we've heard over the last 3.5 years, without PPE and vaccines, I think it's, again, safe to assume that there would have been more deaths in the Canadian population.
And again, under we provided, one of the big programs was the CERB program. It helped a lot of Canadians through the worst times. It provided them with funding on a month-to-month basis. Without the CERB funding, would more or less Canadians be homeless right now?
Well, I can't determine whether more Canadians would be homeless, but without CERB, there would have been a lot of people going without income for periods of time where the country was under lockdown, where businesses were ordered to close because not everybody was eligible for EI and would have been eligible for EI at a lower replacement rate than what CERB provided. So yes, there would have been certainly a significantly higher level of financial distress in 2020.
And is it fair to say that the Canadian federal government spending was in line with how other federal governments around the world had spent money as well too, in terms of percentage of their GDP? It was in line with what other countries had spent on the COVID response. Is that correct?
It varies. Some countries were, generally speaking, some countries were spending more, some were spending less. So Canada was, from what I recall, was not an outlier.
And is it fair to say that with this government's spending, we saved Canadians' lives, we protected jobs, and we protected people's financial positioning?
I think it is fair to say that government interventions contributed to all three objectives you mentioned.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Giroux. I yield my time to my colleague. Thank you.
And you have no time, but we'll go to you for minute 30, Ms. Vinola, please.
Miss.
I'm sure it was as substantive as the first part.
May I?
Please let Ms. Vinola go, please.
Lorsqu'on parle de, et là je vais avoir.
Now I have a question to help people watching this meeting to understand. When we look at a government's financial results, what has the biggest impact? Is it the increase in GDP, moments when there's full employment or a recession, the color of a government in general, programs, cuts? What has the biggest impact on the financial results of a government? Answer: it's difficult to determine which has the highest impact, but in general, the growth of GDP and growth of productivity are the two elements that have the biggest impact on the financial health of a government or not, because the nominal GDP is the best definition of the tax base. So it's the best indicator of a government's capacity to fund services. And does that have any relation to the color of the government? Government policies can have an impact on the growth of GDP depending on policies. For example, a government with a very protectionist policy might end up reducing GDP, but unless the policies are drastically different, their policies play a role, but it isn't the determining factor. Mr. Jones.
Yeah, so I think I'm going to go back to the carbon tax. Heard from my Conservative colleague that said that with the carbon tax being removed, it would be a 0.4% difference in inflation. Right now, it's 0.15, so it's 15 cents on a $100 bag of groceries. And I've outlined corporate greed's about $3.90. The profits from oil and gas is much more, much higher than the carbon tax. Can you help my Conservative colleagues understand, if they remove the carbon tax, what would that look like in terms of the overall cost to the Canadian economy if we had a border carbon adjustment, or if everybody shouldered the cost of the carbon tax? Because 8 in 10 Canadian families get it back. The 2 in 10 that don't, we know that that's actually who they're really fighting for. Maybe you can explain it to them so they understand it.
So you're asking a difficult question of me. So if we were to reduce and take the numbers you're quoting, if we were to take that carbon tax away, and it would result in a 0.15% reduction in inflation, so that would mean inflation would go from 3.8 to 3.65%. So that's the impact it would have using your numbers, versus 0.4% would mean inflation would go from 3.8 to 3.4%. So that would be the impact, again, using the numbers that you quoted.
Okay, and that is, I'm afraid that's our time. Mr. Giroux, we are going to allow you to leave relatively unscathed. Before you run, Mr. Giroux, I'm going to exercise Chair's prerogative and ask a couple quick questions. I'll ask a quick question before you leave. Do you agree that OGO is the only committee that matters, and in the future you will place us ahead of Indu when there's an invite?
I agree, and it's the best leadership. No.
Mr. Giroux, thanks very much. As always, it is a pleasure. Colleagues, we're suspended for a moment.